Alright, UI workshop. This time I've stumbled upon something magnificent, in my opinion. So I've been using the Chipotle app to order my food. Alright, so this is when I go to submit my order. There's this button, and it says hold to submit, and this is what happens when you hold down the button. So it doesn't submit it immediately, it expands, then you have to hold it down, hold to submit, and I think that is the most beautiful button. So we are going to make that button in this WPF UI workshop. And again, gonna expand on a lot of the topics in my custom control series, so I'll leave a link to that one more time. Alright, hold to submit, expands, grows, and submitted.
I also forgot to mention I am not sponsored by Chipotle, but I wish I was. So Chipotle, if you're watching this, you know what to do. Alright, so we're going to start off by creating a new project for our control. So we're going to choose a WPF custom control library, which will scaffold out a lot of the custom control stuff for us. So I'm going to name this control the hold submit button. So my project is going to be the hold submit button control, because that is what the button is. You hold it down and it submits. Alright, so like in previous episodes, I'm not going to go too in depth about this project template, but we have this class for our custom control, and then we have this themes folder and a generic.xaml. The location of this file matters if we want this to all work. And inside here we have a resource dictionary that contains the default style for a control, and this default style is going to get applied because in the static constructor for a control, we override the metadata for the default style key property. So let's start off by getting rid of this gigantic comment and renaming our control to the hold submit button. Alright, so since this is a button, we are going to inherit from button. Unlike last time, we didn't do the inheritance, but we want to reuse a lot of the button logic in this control. And let's actually get this control set up in our demo window so that we can see what's going on as we start making this. So I just have a regular window here, and inside here we are going to have our hold submit button. And before we can use that, we have to add a reference to our control project. So let's do that. And then we can do a control dot on here and add the namespace for our custom control. I'm just going to rename this to custom. And there we go. So if I run this, we get errors, and I believe that's in our generic.xaml. So we're still referencing the placeholder name of custom control 1, but we renamed this to hold submit button. So let's fix that right here and right here, and now we should be good to go. And there we go. Our window is up, but we're not showing anything because we overrode this default template. So for now, I'm just going to comment this out so that we can see our button on the screen. And actually, I think we have to override this override metadata here. So let's get rid of that so that we can actually see the button. And there we go. There's our button, and it takes up the entire screen. So let's horizontal align center, vertical align center, and give it some content of click me, or no, hold me. And there we go. There's our button. And let's get a click handler real quick. And when the click goes through, we'll just pop a message box. Alright, there we go. So we've got our button set up. So now we just need to make this a hold to submit button. So the first thing we need to do is override on click, because right now, whenever you click the button, it immediately executes the event or the command attached to the button. And we don't want to do that, so we're going to get rid of calling the base on click, which will actually execute all of that event or command logic. And inside here, we're going to have our custom holding logic. So it's going to be something like this. We're going to use async await so that we can use task.delay, and then we're going to delay for, we'll do 1,000 milliseconds. We're going to make this customizable in just a little bit, but for now, just a 1 second delay in here. And of course, this method is going to have to be an async void, which is generally okay for event handlers as long as we handle exceptions, which we're going to do in a little bit. But after the 1 second delay, then we're going to call base on click. So we've delayed the click by 1 second, but I can click and then let go, and it'll still execute the click. And that's not what we want. If the user unclicks the button, then we want the click to be canceled because you have to hold down the button for it to submit. So what we're going to do is override on mouse left button up. So whenever they unclick the button, we're going to cancel the click submission. So I'm actually going to put this all in a method called cancel submit, because I'm going to have to use this somewhere else as well. And inside here, what we're going to do is cancel this task.delay. So what we can do inside task.delay is pass in a cancellation token. And where do we get a cancellation token from? We can get that from a cancellation token source. So just initialize one of those, and we're going to put that in a field so that we can use it in this method down here. So a cancellation token source, generate a field for that, and we're going to pass the token from the cancellation token source into the task delay. So whenever we cancel the token, this delay will get canceled as well and will never come down to this click. Instead, it's just going to throw an exception. So if we look at this, a task canceled exception is what's going to get thrown if we cancel this token. So we're going to wrap this in a try catch for a task canceled exception. And we're actually not going to do anything in this try catch because we knew the exception was going to get thrown. We're okay with the cancellation. That's what we want. Alright, and then move the delay into the try catch. And now this cancellation token is in a field. So in this cancel submit method, we can take the token source and call cancel. But since we set up this field on click and not in something like a constructor, the cancellation token source could be null, so we are going to null check that. So if it does not equal null, and we should also make sure that the token hasn't already been canceled. So we have an is cancellation requested property, and if that is false, so it hasn't been canceled yet, then we will cancel. So I click the button, I'm holding it down, holding it down, holding it down, and nothing happens. Why is nothing happening? But then if I let go, we get our message box. So why is that? Well, the click method is a little bit weird. So a button is clicked whenever the mouse comes up. But we want this to all start whenever the user presses down on the button. So instead of overriding on click, instead we're going to override on mouse left button down. So right when they press down on the button, it's going to start doing all of this submission logic with the delay and everything. So we're going to grab all of this and move that into this method. And this is going to have to be async now. And we can remove async down here. And we're actually still going to override on click. We're just going to do nothing inside this method. So if we didn't actually override this, then it would do the regular click logic. So whenever the mouse came up, it would do the event or command attached to the button. And we don't want that. We want everything to go through this holding logic. So after the button has been held for a second, it will do the click and execute the event or command. So let's see this in action. So I click it, and whoops, we have a little bit of an issue here. So it immediately executes the click once I let go, and that is because we throw this task canceled exception, but then we catch it, and then we just execute the click. So what we have to do is move this inside the try catch so that this only gets executed if there was no task cancellation. So if it got canceled, if the user's mouse came up, then we do not want to execute the click. We only want to execute the click if we made it through the delay without canceling. So now I click, all good, task was canceled. So now I click again, hold, there we go. We get the 1 second hold and the submission. Alright, so the reason I moved all the cancel submit logic into its own method is because if you press the button and then move away, it still submits it. So what we have to do is cancel the submission whenever the mouse leaves the button. So whenever we're not hovering over the button anymore, we're going to cancel the submit. So here we go, press it, move away, and there we go. Task was canceled because we are no longer on top of the button. So this was kind of the easy part. We've made it through a lot of the logic for our control, implementing all of the mouse and holding stuff. But now the fun part, the UI, where we get into the animation and all of that. So I'm going to bring back this override for the default style, and I'll uncomment this in my generic.xaml, and we'll start implementing this. So let's start off with just a regular grid, and inside here we're going to have all of our control template stuff. So let's begin with an ellipse, which is going to represent that circle that we saw on the hold submit button, and the width of this is going to be a template binding to the width that is set on our control. So for example, in our demo window, we should set the width to, we'll go with 200, we'll do height 200, so it's a circle. So since we set this, that means our ellipse width is going to be 200 as well. So that's what the template binding will point to, and we'll do the same thing for height, a template binding to the height, and then the fill. So the color of this ellipse, I actually looked up the Chipotle brand colors, so I have those hex values right here. There we go. Alright, good start. Then we're going to have a text block for the content of the button. So in the Chipotle submit button, it was hold to submit. For us, it's just hold me. Let's make it hold to submit. Let's match this up perfectly. So we're going to center this in the button, horizontally and vertically. Make sure the text is centered as well. Our text is going to be white. We'll make it a little bit bigger too. We'll give it 16 font size. And then most importantly, the text property is going to be a template binding to our button's content. So again, this will bind to the content that we've set on our hold submit button. And since both of these are within my grid and within the same cell, we don't have any rows or columns in here anyways, I will apply a z index to these. So this will have a z index of 2, and this will have a z index of 3. So this text block will always be above the ellipse. There we go, off to a good start. Now one issue we have is that this ellipse is just a straight up template binding to our width and height. But we're going to need an ellipse to grow. So if we're already at the max width and height that we have set on the control, we have no more room left to grow. So what we're going to do is make sure this ellipse is, we'll go with half the size of the width and height, so that we have some room to grow. So we're going to have to set up a converter for this. So let's add a folder for converters, and this will be the multiplication converter. We'll just call it multiply converter. So it'll be a class implementing I value converter, and inside convert, we're going to return the value of multiplying the value and the parameter that gets passed into the converter. So we have to parse those as doubles first. So we're going to use double.try parse the value to string, and we'll put that out to num1. And then we also have to parse the parameter to string. We'll put that out to num2. And if we successfully parse both of those, then we're just going to return the value of multiplying num1 and num2. But if either of these parses failed, they returned false, then we're just going to return 0 as our default value. And we shouldn't have to implement convert back because we're not going to be converting back. So let's get those converters into our style resources. So we're going to have the multiply converter, import that, converter's namespace, and we'll give it a key of multiply converter. So now we can use that converter for our width and height. So the multiply converter, and we're going to multiply this by 0.5. So the size is going to be half of the width and height that we set by default. And we'll do the same thing for our width as well. There we go. Alright, so there we go, we made it smaller, and now the hold to submit text is a little bit small too. So we're going to set a width on that, and we'll make this 0.4 so that it's a little bit smaller. And we also want to wrap the text as well, because now it just overruns and we can't see it. And there we go, that looks much better. So now we have plenty of room outside of this hold to submit button for this button to expand when we hold it down. So let's do that expanding. So we're going to have some triggers for our root grid of our control template, and we're going to have an event trigger for mouse left button down. So basically whenever you click this grid, it's going to do the animation that we put in this event trigger. So we're going to have a begin storyboard. The storyboard basically contains all of the animation logic. So we're going to begin a storyboard, and the storyboard we're going to begin, we will define right here, and we're going to have some animation. So we're going to do a double animation, and we're going to have to specify the name of the element we want to animate. So that is going to be this ellipse. So we got to give it a name. We'll just call it ellipse. So use that as the target name. We also need a target property. For now it's going to be the width. So that's what we're going to animate. We're going to animate that growing. And we're just going to grow to the width of the templated parent. So the templated parent is the hold submit button. And we can find that by using relative source. So that'll just go up and up the visual tree until we find the templated parent of the hold submit button, and we'll grab the width property of that. And while we're here, let's do the same thing for height. Just change these properties. Alright, so I'm going to press the button, and there we go, it grows. And we submit, but then the button doesn't shrink anymore. So how do we get it to go back to the shrinking state? Well, we're going to have to know in our control when the submission was completed. So we made it to the on click after the delay, and we also want to know if the submit was canceled. So for either of those cases, we want the button to shrink back down to its original state. So what we're going to do is raise events for the submission completed or the submission canceled, and then in our control template, we can have event triggers for those events and do animations back to the original state. So in WPF, those are routed events. So we're going to have a static read-only routed event. And we can't use regular .NET events because then we wouldn't be able to use those in this routed event property. So routed events, much more powerful in WPF. And our first event is the hold completed event. So I'm going to move this to a new line because this gets pretty long with routed events. Same thing with dependency properties, which we haven't gotten into yet in this video, which reminds me, I wish I had a snippet for routed events, but I don't right now. Anyways, we're going to use the event manager and register a routed event, which we will name hold completed. We're going to use a routed strategy of bubbling, so it's going to start from our button and bubble up to the root window, which isn't that important here. Our handler is just going to be a routed event handler, so nothing special here, and the owner is just the hold submit button. And then we have to actually set up the event that this hold completed event is going to reference in our control. So a regular event and a routed event handler was the delegate type for our routed event that we specified, and we named this hold completed, which we said right here. And whenever anything subscribes to this event, we're going to call add handler on the base control. I believe this is on UI element, so this is on like almost every WPF element. Call add handler. We're adding a handler to the hold completed event and the value of the event handler that gets passed into this add. And then same thing for remove, except we're going to call remove handler. So now we got our event. Let me just copy this real quick so that we can get one for hold canceled. So change all of this. Make sure we change our event name, update the add handler and remove handler, and hopefully we got everything. So now we just need to raise those events in the appropriate places. So whenever we complete and we click the button, we're going to raise event, pass in a new routed event args, and inside here we specify the event name. So this is the hold completed event, and then whenever the hold is canceled, we'll catch this task canceled exception and raise a hold canceled event. So now we got our events, let's use them in our UI. And this is where things get a little bit frustrating. So right now we have our triggers in our grid, but our grid isn't going to receive those hold completed and hold canceled events. So we need to set up event triggers in our control template triggers. So let's set up control template triggers, and we can have an event trigger for the hold completed event and the hold canceled event. And now we have triggers here for our control template and triggers here for our grid. So you might be thinking, why don't you just move this event trigger that starts the animation, the growing animation, why don't we just move that into our control template triggers and just keep everything in one place? Well, the issue with these control template triggers is that we can't have bindings inside of here. So we wouldn't be able to bind to the height or template bind or any kind of binding. No bindings are allowed inside of control template triggers. So that being said, we really need to keep this event trigger inside of our grid triggers, or else we'd have to hard code the width or height values. So then you might be thinking, okay, why don't you just move these event triggers into the grid triggers? And of course we can't do that because this grid doesn't have hold completed or hold canceled events. So this is our only option. We have to split up our event triggers like this. But as I mentioned, we can't have bindings inside of these event triggers, so how are we going to restore this ellipse back to its original width and height? Well, we're actually not. Instead, what we're going to do is a little bit more tricky. So we're going to have another ellipse, and it's going to have the same fill. We'll give it a width of 0 and a height of 0. So by default, you're not going to be able to see this ellipse. And this ellipse is actually going to be on top of our regular ellipse right here. So we'll give it a z-index of 3 and update our text block to have a z-index of 4. And we're going to have to give this a name because we're going to animate it. So we'll call this the hold ellipse. So what we're going to do is never have this regular ellipse grow or shrink. So that way we never have to worry about restoring its original width or height, because we can't do that in these event triggers down here. They can't have bindings. So I'll change the name of this to normal ellipse. It's just a regular ellipse, never going to grow or shrink. Instead, we're going to grow and shrink the hold ellipse. So let's update that in our first event trigger. Let's change that to the hold ellipse. And we actually want its animation to start from the width of the normal ellipse. And same thing for height. So we're going to start from this calculated width and height, and we're going to grow to the max width and height on our templated parent, which is the hold submit button. And then whenever the hold is canceled or completed, we can begin another storyboard. And let's copy these double animations because we're going to do width and height again, targeting the same hold ellipse. But now we're just going to send this to the original value of 0. So now we don't have to worry about doing any bindings here, which we wouldn't be able to anyways, because we're going to have this placeholder ellipse that has the static width and height on it already. So we can just set this ellipse back to its original value of 0, and it's going to look perfectly fine. And I get some kind of exception here. I must have named something wrong. So these should not have event at the end of their names, because that's the name of our static routed event. We're going to be subscribing to the actual event. And I still get an exception. I think that is because this event trigger is empty. So let's comment that out for now. And there we go. So we're going to hold it down and then let go. And there we go, back to normal. So I want to do the same thing when the hold is completed. So instead of just duplicating this, I'm going to move it into my resources. So just copy the storyboard, paste it in here, and give it a key. We'll call it the restore storyboard. And now I can use that resource for both of my event triggers here. So let's open this back up, paste in the restore storyboard. Alright, so I'm still getting the exception for this routed event, and that is because I spelled completed wrong in this string right here. And that could have been prevented if I instead did the strongly typed name of and pointed to my event down here. So in fact, I am going to do that because it looks better too. There's no magic strings or anything. Alright, all good. So now I will actually do the submission. Okay, and there we go, button restores. Alright, so we've got the growing and expanding all sorted out, but this isn't really how the button looks at all. So as we recall, there's like a yellow background that shoots out, and then this brownish button begins to grow. So we got to get that background going first. So we're going to have another ellipse. This one's going to be the background ellipse. Same thing as the hold ellipse, so by default it's going to have a width and height of 0. And this one's going to be all the way in the back, so we're going to give it a z-index of 1. And the fill was that kind of like yellowish color. So I have that in a hex code as well. There we go, looks pretty good. So let's add that to our storyboard. So what I'm going to do is just copy these animations and paste those, except this is going to be for the BG background ellipse. And same thing, we're going to start from the width and height of the normal ellipse and grow to the max width and height of the control. And we're still going to do that for both of our ellipses, but now it's all about timing. So the background ellipse grows immediately, and it goes pretty quick too if we look at the original Chipotle button. So we're just going to give this a duration of 0.25 seconds. So pretty quick. And then this hold ellipse, so the actual brown button that grows to the size of the background, this has a little bit of a delay to it. So we're going to give it a begin time of, we'll go with 0.4. So it's going to start about 0.15 seconds after the background reaches the max width and height. And we'll do that for the width and height here. And before we forget, since we are expanding the background ellipse, we're also going to want to shrink it back to its original width and height. And let's do that in the restore storyboard. So same thing, width and height to 0, except now it's the background ellipse. Alright, here we go. This should look pretty good. So now we got the background in here. So press down. There we go. So the background expanded, then the actual button, the brown part, expanded to reach the size of the background, and then we submit it. Alright, then we go back to normal. That's good. But as we look at this, it actually submits before the brown part reaches the size of the yellow part. So let's see that again. There we go. We submit it, but it was still growing. And that's not what we want. We want this to be in sync. So once the brown part reaches the size of the background, then we want it to submit. Otherwise, people are going to be pretty confused about this button. Like, it submits when it's only halfway to its max size. That's just not right. So the reason it's doing that is because our begin time is delayed now. But I think the bigger issue is that we're not even setting the duration for these animations. So let's set the duration, and since we're delaying by 0.4 and our total hold submit time is 1 second, that means our duration is going to be the remaining 0.6 seconds. So I think by default it was like a full 1 second, and obviously that would make the total time for this animation 1.4 seconds. So we got to trim this duration down a little bit. Alright, here we go, hold to submit, grows, and there we go, right in sync. Now another thing that we can do to try and get this to match the Chipotle button even more is the acceleration. So if we look at this, the brown part kind of has a steady acceleration to it, but with the Chipotle button it seems like it kind of starts off slow and has to like work its way up to max acceleration speed. So for that, we can adjust the acceleration ratio of the growing brown ellipse, and we can set that to 0.6, and we'll do that for the width and height, of course. And what this means is that 60% of the animation is going to be spent accelerating. So that means we're going to take a little bit of time to accelerate the full speed before we start growing at max speed, which is kind of how the Chipotle button looks in my opinion. So now we hold, and as you can see, it slowly accelerates and then it goes really fast. So the last thing I want to do is have a property that we can set on our control where we can specify the duration that the user has to hold for. So it'd be something like hold duration, and inside here we'd put a duration, so maybe we want 2 seconds. And to support this, we're going to have a dependency property. So let's do the prop dp snippet. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I have videos on dependency properties and routed events that I'll link. But anyways, this dependency property is going to be the hold duration property. It's going to be a type of duration, and the owner class is the hold submit button, of course. And the default value, we will do duration automatic. So you might be wondering why I chose duration as my type, and that is because the duration on storyboard animations has a type of duration as well. So it's going to be easy to use this value in our storyboards. And that is exactly what we're going to do. So I'm just going to copy this binding because this hold duration is on our templated parent. And I'll paste that, change it to hold duration, and same thing for the height. And now I need to use this hold duration inside of my delay here. So to do that, we can take our hold duration, and it has a time span on it. So we can take that time span and get the total seconds. And actually, test delay is milliseconds. So we want total milliseconds. And this is a double, but we need an int. So I'm just going to cast it to int. And there we go. We successfully set the hold duration on our hold submit button. So we are picking up that dependency property. We have that at 2 seconds. So we're going to delay for those 2 seconds and then submit. But we have the same issue we had before, because this duration of the growing is going to be 2 seconds, but we delay for 0.4 seconds before we start this animation. So the total time of this is 2.4 seconds, but we submit after 2 seconds. So what we're going to do is subtract 0.4 from this whole duration. And to do that, we're going to have a converter. So I'm going to create another converter. Converters are so great for like math stuff because you really can't be doing math in XAML. And this is going to be the duration seconds subtraction converter. So just an I value converter. Implement that interface, and we're not going to have to worry about convert back. We're only converting to. And what we have to do is make sure the value that gets passed in is a duration. And we have to parse the parameter to a double. So this needs to be try parse actually. So make sure that's a double. We'll just call that num. So if our value is a duration and our parameter is some kind of number, then we're going to take the duration and subtract a time span from seconds, and we can pass in our parameter seconds. So maybe I should call this seconds. There we go. Do the subtraction and just return the difference. And if any of these checks fail, then we're just going to return the value because someone passed in some kind of gibberish to the value and parameter. So let's get that converter in here, the duration seconds subtraction converter. Use that converter for our hold duration, and the converter parameter is going to be 0.4 seconds because that's what we have for our begin time, which delays the animation. So let's just copy that and paste that for our with animation as well. So everything should be in sync. There we go. So we're going like a full 2 seconds now, and the submission occurs at the perfect time. And now that I'm looking at it, the shrinkage is pretty slow, so I want to speed this up. So for the restore storyboard, we're going to set all of those durations to a much faster 0.25 seconds. See about this. That's a little bit fast. I'm going to go with it. I like it. Alright, so we're pretty much done. We got the hold to submit logic, and we have the Chipotle button styling. Let's talk about some issues. So our begin time is 0.4 seconds, and we subtract that from the hold duration. So what if the hold duration is less than 0.4 seconds? We're going to have a negative duration. So let's try that. Let's set this to 0.2. Ooh, yuck, we get an exception. So the value must be greater than or equal to 0, and we have a negative. So what we can do is add some validation to this hold duration property. So we're going to skip the property change callback and have a coerce value callback. So we'll generate a method for that callback, coerce hold duration. And inside here, if the base value is a duration, and the duration's total seconds is greater than or equal to 0.4, then we're just going to return the base value. So everything should be good with the value. We don't have to do any coercion, because if it's 0.4, then when we do this subtraction, we are not going to have a negative number. But if the value isn't a duration, or it's less than 0.4 seconds, we're just going to return a new duration of 0.4 seconds. So there we go, we hit this because our base value is 0.2, but instead we're just going to return 0.4. Let's add a little bit of cushion to this. Let's do 0.5. Alright, so another issue is that we've hard-coded these fills in here, and if the user of this button ever wanted to have different fills, they wouldn't be able to change them. They'd have to completely redefine the control template and pass in whatever fill they wanted. So instead, what you could have is dependency properties on your button for those brush colors, and then whoever uses this button could set whatever the color they wanted on the hold submit button. So you could have like primary color and then background color. These would be the dependency properties, and then you could use those dependency properties in these fills right here. But I'm just going to leave this how it is because I love Chipotle so much. Gotta rep those colors. And the last issue is if you do not specify a width or height on this control, it gets pretty funky. I don't even think it works. The hold to submit still works, but it just doesn't animate or anything. And we even get binding errors because the width and height are set to not a number, nan. So that's something that I might look into in case I want to publish this as some kind of NuGet package. But for now, just going to leave as is, so you have to specify the width or height. So that is where we're going to wrap up. So we implemented the hold to submit logic for our control and then set up the animations to support this. We ran into some issues with event triggers because if an event trigger in a control template has a binding, it's not going to work. So we had to move some of our event triggers to our grid. We also did some cool stuff with converters, and we also did some validation for our hold duration property by coercing this value if it is less than 0.5. We also messed around with routed events for the first time in the series. That was exciting. So that is where we're going to wrap up. Chipotle, please sponsor me. If you have any questions, criticisms, or concerns, be sure to leave them below in the comment section. Other than that, leave a like or subscribe for more. Thank you.